Started today with our guest, Dr. Christina Sauer, Associate Professor in Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Program Director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship. Today on the UNM Healthcast, Christina is going to talk with us about how to best set our kids up for success at home and at school, since it's all one and the same these days. Welcome, Dr. Sauer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be here.
So we're just going to dive right in because this is obviously, APS just put out a memo that they are extending their at-home learning at least into the new year and likely some hybrid version in the spring if we can accommodate that, just kind of depending on how this pandemic shakes out at this point. So we are all looking at teaching, having our kids do schooling from home for a while longer, or most of us are. So let's start talking about their workspaces. Why is it important for a child to have a space that feels like theirs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's certainly an important topic to bring up because, there's all these different things we're juggling with kids at home as far as priorities and what needs to be taken care of. But I think having the mindfulness around their workspace is really valuable as far as giving them an opportunity to kind of have their own space that is associated with schoolwork and, helps set them up hopefully for success. And I think, there's been various things published and from what we understand about kind of how we focus best and how our brains sort of organize experiences, it's pretty clear that having an individualized workspace can be really valuable for kids as they're now doing all of their schoolwork at home.
So what if a parent really wants to make a space feel like it's dedicated to their child's schoolwork, but they don't have enough space in their house to really set that aside? Is there anything that we can do to, maybe take an adult desk or a kitchen table or a coffee table and help make it feel more like a kid space?
Yeah, definitely. And people have been creative too with, like you've mentioned, some of those shared spaces and also thinking about, can I use a hallway? Are there other like sort of small nooks and crannies in my house that I can make some additional space for the child's workspace too? But yeah, certainly there's some pretty creative ideas out there, including like making a little cubicle space for your child, like whether that's using a cardboard box, something that you can frame that has some sides that gives them a little bit of separation. And I think kids really respond well based on the age, but especially elementary age, middle school kids can respond really well if they feel like they have some ownership in maybe decorating that little cubicle space, or having the ability to help like decorate and plan out, this is where I keep my utensils or pencils, and these are my notebooks or writing tools too. So yeah, certainly just trying to be, I think, thoughtful about, are there little things we can do that give them some privacy? And I think the cubicle setup is one of the most popular ones I've heard about.
Yeah, for sure. I have a child who's in kindergarten. It's a very weird way to start official school. So we, in her space, her teacher gave them 4 classroom agreements at the beginning of the school year. So I wrote all the agreements on different pieces of paper, and then she got to decorate them, and we hung those up in her space. So it feels like now she's in class and there are her agreements to remember, and really kind of like shifts the beginning of the day from, breakfast and running around and playing into you are at school now, even though it's technically just in your bedroom. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
A little separation.
So, yeah. So if there are, we're taking all these steps, we're making all this effort to help our kids feel like they are in a learning space and learning mode. What are some signs we might look for that it's not going very well, that they maybe need some adjustments, that there's something we should be doing differently?
Sure. Yeah, and that's another one that sometimes depends on age and temperament of your children, as well as like, kind of other things going on at home. But so for older kids and teenagers who have more developed like maybe awareness of what they're feeling and verbal skills. Certainly, we encourage families to be mindful about checking in and having good conversations around, how are you feeling? How is this going? Um, and and some younger kids certainly are capable of that too, and you can find different ways, of course, to be able to do check-ins with kids of all ages. But I think as they're younger, we also really encourage families to be on the watch for behavioral changes, since that's often the easiest way for kids to communicate. So it might be, issues with, I guess, staying focused or, participating. Sometimes kids that are becoming pretty oppositional with logging on to school, or that just seem to want to isolate more, or where they're like acting out a lot more. Those are all, certainly in ways also natural responses to change and having new routines and everything that, families and kids have had to go through. But I
Mhm.
think especially when that's pronounced, or if it's kind of new, it's worth trying to look more at the roots of, what's going on there. And, I think it's also a little bit of feedback for parents with those behaviors, to what extent it's most helpful to have clear schedules and clear kind of separation versus like having parents more involved, through the day, to be, present and giving attention where they can.
Yeah, I remember, about midway through, at least midway so far through this new pandemic, I saw a tweet from a parent who said when she found herself losing her temper with her young child, which was pretty often these days, she remembered that, in March, he was taken out of school one day and never saw his friends again, like, which is a psychological adjustment that, would be difficult for adults. So,
Right.
um, is there, I think that I would love to hear your thoughts on what we're all dealing with in terms of, the change that you just mentioned, and how our kids might be struggling, and how we can not only support them while they're at school and learning, but how can we support them, navigating this new world where they don't really get to have play dates, and either they only get to hang out with their siblings, or they're an only child and they don't have siblings to play with. So they're in this very adult world all of a sudden, or, very isolated world. What are some things we can do to help support our kids in this time of upheaval and uncertainty?
Definitely. Yeah, and I think it has been an evolution for all of us. And there's been so much uncertainty about, what's the trajectory of, things with the pandemic, and how our lives will continue to be kind of, in ways, unpredictable versus getting back to a more predictable course. But yeah, so there's a few things that we really encourage. I mean, the one that you brought up, kind of parents just encouraging them to have an awareness and to keep an eye out for changes in how their kids are behaving and how they're engaging, and, wanting to spend time with other people, or wanting to do activities that they usually do. And so when we see changes in those, we start to just have some curiosity, like, kind of, is there, some underlying unrest, or potentially like mood anxiety pieces that are coming up for kids. So we encourage families where they can to try to have check-ins about how's everybody doing. How are we coping with this, validating for kids that it's hard. I think sometimes being able to share our own experience of this being difficult too, or just like giving them the opportunity to express, to the extent they can, frustration, sadness. Those pieces can all be helpful. And then I think, sometimes it's also a nice component to have like routine or planned, visits with family or with friends that are virtual, or whatever safe way it can be done. But to give kids still an outlet where that's something they can look forward to. And then, when, especially if you have a child who does have a pre-existing history of anxiety or mood issues, I think that it's worth especially keeping an eye on them, given that we know stress and all of these changes can precipitate exacerbations in their illnesses. But also, I think for kids who have maybe previously had therapists or had counselors, or, just other people that are good mentors or support for them, Just is a nice time, I think, to try to keep some of those relationships going so that they have outlets, again, in these ways that are kind of a little bit more routine and reliable. And then again, I think just working with what we can with the pandemic about how to support them with friends and really just having open dialogues where we can about this being hard, but how we're going to get through it and where are some of the positives that we can be doing and what are new activities we can be doing and kind of balancing out, the loss, the grief part too.
Yeah, absolutely. So another pretty well-known stress buster or a anxiety reducer is physical activity, which a lot of kids are not getting as much of because they're not, out in a recess situation. They don't have a bunch of other kids to run around with. So what can we do as parents throughout the school day to make sure that our kids are moving away from their iPads or their laptops and actually getting some physical activity, getting some exercise? How can we help build that into their daily routine?
Yeah, great question too. So there's I think there's a lot of encouragement to consider, as you just mentioned, routines for kids because it gives that sense of predictability and sort of knowing what's coming ahead that can be a little bit more calming and reassuring with all the changes. So people, have come up with different creative ways, whether it's like having a visual calendar for the kids for the day or having the kids help draw up a calendar for themselves or for their families. And so definitely thinking about scheduling in physical activity is important there. I think we're fortunate in New Mexico, we live somewhere that it's nice enough that we can still be outside or that we can still take advantage of going outside. And so we know that that can help kids as far as moving energy and thereby helping with the attention and focus. But also thinking about, what are family activities that you can do together that are active. I think, a lot of parents are feeling torn about screen time right now because many kids are on screens more than they used to be between the virtual learning and then sometimes just to kind of get through the day with everything going on in family life. But there are a lot of unique like exercise or physical activity, videos or YouTubes that can help kids be active too. And so yeah, I think just again having an awareness of about being important and thinking about how can this be a group family activity or just like how can we schedule it in for the kids so they know to look forward to it and maybe find ways that they see it as fun if there's different new activities that they enjoy as well. But yeah, it's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. My child found on her own a PBS Kids game that has like charades for kids. So she gets, really into it, acting out different scenes and stuff. And I just think, oh, thank God you're moving your body. That's
Yeah,
so great.
that's awesome.
So if they are showing signs of restlessness in their school space or especially for younger kids, if they're, having a hard time paying attention, I know we talked a lot about the value of routine, but is it okay to like mix up their routine every once in a while to kind of help maybe refocus their energy if they're getting a little antsy?
Sure. Yeah, there's the routine piece. And again, I think some kids, for example, like children who are on the autism spectrum, they generally do better with very kind of planned, rigid routines. But I think for a lot of kids, they benefit from the variety and kind of giving new spin on things, having some fun with it. So yeah, I think, and if as a parent, it also gives you a little bit of like boost of, we're trying something new and doing something different. Yeah, there's certainly value to it. And I don't think it would be of concern to throw them off, just, that they have some days or parts of the day that are pretty consistent, right? As far as like wake up and meal times and bedtimes and some of those important pieces. But yeah, varying the activities can certainly be a good breath of fresh air with everything going on.
Yeah, absolutely. There's you know, I I know that we as adults have at this point sort of a built-in instinct, especially if we spend a lot of our day sitting at a desk, that if our body feels stiff or, we realize I need to stretch or I need to get up or move around or like I can counter this soreness in this way because it's just kind of built in for us. Do you have any tips or advice on how we might do that for our kids? Like, is there any specific movement, especially kids who are maybe using screens or computers and things for really the first time on a regular basis? Is there anything they should be doing to really counter the kinds of strains and stressors that they're putting on their bodies?
Yeah, that's no, that's really awesome thought. Yeah, so that's where coming up with the workspace idea, I think you can also be considerate about ergonomics and right, because if they're kind of slouching on the couch and just hanging out there um, multiple hours a day, that may not be the best for their kind of longer term sustainability with it. But yeah, definitely, I think building in routine stretch breaks, giving kids the opportunity to certainly stand up and move around, but often stretching and encouraging them to do like full body stretches as far as like reaching up, and sometimes people have them do arm circles and kind of flex out their wrists so that they're opposing some of these movements that they're doing a lot of. But yeah, I think it's, again, kind of what the kid will have fun with, and just getting them up and out of the seated position is probably the most important. But some kids also really take to like these different yoga, the brief yoga videos that are also available. And so certainly that can also be a helpful kind of counterbalance to the sedentary time when they're doing school the rest of the day.
Yeah, it's surprising how much my child has taken to things like yoga and meditation. And I, I just feel like, that's her, she's really, it's resonating with her as I think is a way to counter some of the stress of all the change.
Yeah.
Um, so if there is, a complaint that comes up from your kid about pain or discomfort or anything that isn't really going away.
Mhm.
Um, so, if we try changing where they're sitting or changing, their workspace up for a little bit and they're still in pain, what are the next steps that parents should take?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would hurt to, be in touch with like primary care provider, which a lot of that's virtual at this point. Um, but I mean, because there may be some, it may be worth just talking a little bit about what's contributing. I think the other things that we keep in mind are that, right, some kids may be struggling with anxiety, or they may be struggling with kind of emotional adjustments to what's going on. And so for some kids, like the physical symptoms are having physical concerns is their primary way of vocalizing that. So I think it's worth like, kind of keeping that in mind too with all the stress going on. But yeah, I think if as a parent, to the extent that you're able to modify their workspace, the other thing that some parents do is they make like standing workspaces for their kids, kind of like, is the more trend now with adults to have like standing desks, is to set up space for the kids where they can be standing at least part of the time when they're working. Or having ways that like if they're on an iPad or an electronic device, making sure that it's at their kind of eye level. Some kids that are especially big enough to like sit on a yoga ball, that can be another way that you can counter some of the ergonomic challenges. So I think just, creativity and in assessing those things, keeping in mind that it's possible the physical concerns might be related to some emotional issues, but yeah, I'd say otherwise contacting a primary doc, or, considering just if there's anything else that should be looked at. But yeah, hopefully most of our kids are resilient enough that some modifications in their setup would be helpful.
For sure. Yeah, my child's young enough that most of the time she just has imaginary injuries these days because she's playing fighting dinosaurs or something and she breaks her leg.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And plus it's another way, if they're sitting by themselves for a while, it's another way to kind of get mom or dad's attention too. So
Yeah, absolutely. My I ran my finger across my paper. I need a Band-Aid. Really,
exactly.
you're fine. So lastly, my last big question for you is, a lot of us who are parents who are working from home are now also inadvertently finding ourselves in the position of assistant teacher,
Uh-huh.
really having to balance our work lives, our personal lives, our parenting lives with this new role of trying to support our children academically, which, a lot of us aren't really equipped to do. We were just sort of thrust into this position. And I'm wondering what advice you might have for parents in terms of how we can best support our kids in that role, and what, is an ideal balance between being there to support them and also like encouraging their independence by leaving them to their teachers in their virtual classrooms as much as possible. What are your thoughts around all of that?
Right. Yeah, I think at a foundational point, we try to come back with parents to the consideration that having compassion for ourselves is an important place to start with, because as a parent trying to juggle work and now being a teacher and more full-time childcare and everything else going on, it's a lot, I think, on parents behave and their behalf on their plates as well. And I think parents right now are feeling like, I need to be able to do all these things and I need to be able to do them well, and I don't want my child to fall behind. And so just to kind of keep it sustainable for parents, we've tried to be encouraging of like, okay, you're doing the best you can. How can we help you find space to, be mindful about what you need, and self-care and some of those other pieces too. So just kind of as the background there, wanting to encourage that. But I think as far as, supporting your child, again, recognizing there's so much out there that's like, this is the right way to do it. This is how you should do it. And that's not always the case for every kid. So I think we really just try to encourage parents to be mindful about some of the recommendations that are, being encouraged. Trying to think about ways that you can incorporate maybe some of the tips or some of the different ideas that other people are finding helpful, but also recognizing for your child, it may be just a different path that works the best. I think that, certainly schools are all different right now as far as how long they're doing classes for, how much time they're expecting kids to be in one position versus, having more kind of freedom and homework to catch up on things. So I think it's really like, trying to read your child's cues, especially, hopefully early on in their classes and with their teachers, being more present and more attentive to kind of seeing how it's going. And then hopefully as they get into the routine, giving them the space to be developing that kind of independence in ways with their classes. But yeah, I think it's just, in a lot of ways, it's a two-way street, kind of getting feedback from your child, and I think being able to talk with them and the teacher about how it's going. But coming back to like, for a lot of people right now, it's just really trying to do like the best we can. A lot of things are going to be good enough, getting them through the semester. If it's a situation that everybody's able to manage it without exceedingly high stress levels, and that you feel like at least you're kind of on top of what your child should be doing. And then again, if there's more concerns about your child's behavior, about them just being very like kind of challenging, oppositional, or withdrawn and disengaged, those would be situations we'd really encourage families to look at contacting their primary care or reaching out to mental health providers. Again, because it may signal more underlying, challenges that your child's having that they can't communicate as clearly.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think it's really important to leave with our listeners and viewers?
I I appreciate you having this topic. There's so much swirling with the state of the world right now and with COVID, but I do think the more that we can just continue to ground in like these things that we can control or try to support day to day, I think is really valuable. So no, I feel like you've touched on most of it, and again, just trying to provide a space for parents to feel like this isn't easy. There's no real cookbook protocol exactly on how it should be done, and that
Right.
I think everyone's really trying to put their best foot forward, and there's certainly resources out there to support you if it's persistently too much of a struggle.
Do you have any particular resources that you find trustworthy or helpful in terms of either parent support or guidance or, helping nurture their kids through learning? Any of that stuff that you find that you would recommend?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, of course, with Google, I know that can lead you multiple different directions, just
Yes.
search pieces. I think there's some health websites that have great information. So the American Pediatric Association and the Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Those both have some very well-developed resource sections for parents and for kids as well. But in navigating a lot of these different concerns, and also like with regards to determining how to get your child more help if needed. So I think those are both good sites. I think for example, like the Mayo Clinic also has good resources, and a lot of times university-based healthcare systems have some good published information too. So I think those are worth looking into. And then, sometimes also connecting with your school. The school health centers are still up and running. And so a lot of times the counselors or the healthcare staff that are working there also have access to additional resources that can be of support, and their teachers have supported too. So those are just a few things that come to the top of my head as far as places to seek out.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. For
Mm.
those of you who maybe started this in the middle, or, we have been talking today with Dr. Christina Sauer, who is the Associate Professor in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and the Program Director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship. And we really appreciate you talking with us today, Dr. Sauer. Thank you so much for your time.
Definitely. Thanks for having me, and certainly hope everybody stays well with the upcoming Thanksgiving and holiday stretch too.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our listeners and viewers, for the latest information on the coronavirus, you can visit our newsroom, hsc.unm.edu/COVID-19 for the most up-to-date information on what's happening with the health system and COVID. And you can find more podcasts with our UNM health experts at hsc.unm.edu/news or wherever you stream your podcasts. It may still be listed under the UNM Health Hour, although we are now shifting to the UNM Health Cast since it's not an hour long anymore. So for the latest news from HSC and about our virtual events, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at UNM HSC. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks again, Dr. Sauer.
Thank you.